Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest today is mastering engineer John Greenham. But first of all, let's talk about something new in social media, and that's something called attention economics. Now, as we all know, there's lots of media sources, and they're all competing for our attention. As a result, our attention span has really decreased over the years, and Microsoft recently did a study and found out the average attention span decreased from 12 seconds to about 8 seconds, which is less than a goldfish, believe it or not. What's happening now is tech companies really aren't competing against one another as much as they're competing with time spent on different media sources. Now, one of the things here that's really interesting is the fact that listening to music really requires no engagement at all. Very much unlike gaming or watching videos, for instance, which requires all of your attention. That being said, we've been finding out that attention to listening to music has actually been growing with streaming audio. So in other words, when people stream music, they actually pay more attention than when they listen to it in other forms. Now, many think one of the reasons for this is the fact that they're paying for it. And on Spotify, for instance, if you're paying for it, they found that you're more likely to pay attention. The other thing that was really interesting is they found that the average user on Spotify listens to an average of 41 artists per week, which is pretty amazing. Really what's happening is there are more people that are listening and discovering on streaming networks than just about anywhere else right now. And that's a really good thing for music. Now, all that being said, it's been discovered that artists really need to build the attention span with their fans. They have to get their fans' attention. And they have to keep that attention as much as possible. That's why social media, that's why YouTube, that's why being online, that's why just about anything that reaches out and engages one of your customers, one of your fans, is really important. The reason why is once upon a time you concentrated on making a sale, and most of those sales occurred in the first week or two after the release happened. And after that, the attention, the sales, everything dropped off a cliff. Today, that's not the case. And we've been finding that it may take as long as 2 years before a release might get its legs. So you have to keep up the attention span with the audience in the meantime. It's really important to cultivate that. Yeah, you have to work on new music and you have to keep on releasing new things, but you can't ignore older releases because oftentimes they're actually going to increase in attention as they go along. And as we know, the attention span of your audience right now is everything. If you have any questions or comments, send in to questions@bobbyoinnercircle.com. The second edition of my social media promotion for musicians handbook is now available on Amazon, iBooks, Ingram, and a bookstore near you. It's the manual for marketing yourself, your band, and your music online, and it covers how to use virtually every important online platform for musical promotion. Also, check out my courses at bobbyowsinskicourses.com. Now, another interesting thing that I came across this last week was the music of psychopaths. What is a psychopath? Well, it's a person suffering from a chronic mental disorder that has abnormal or violent social behavior. And we all know a number of these people, and a lot of them wind up in jail. That being said, we all have a little bit of psychopathy within us. And NYU wanted to study how much we each have. So they began to interview people, and these were mostly average people that they were interviewing, right up to, again, hardened criminals. One of the criteria was a type of music that they listened to. And wow, that was really interesting. People in the study were asked about 100 songs, most of them unfamiliar to them, and they range from the latest top hits on Billboard to classical recordings and everything in between. And what they found out was pretty amazing. For instance, some of the songs that scored highest on the psychopathy level was Eminem's Lose Yourself, which was the absolute highest, followed by Blackstreet's No Diggity, and closely after that was Justin Bieber's What Do You Mean? On the bottom of the scale that showed pretty much no level of psychopathy was Dire Straits' Money for Nothing, which is the absolute lowest, the country song Wayward Wind, and the Knack's My Sharona. The study also worked backwards, where if they asked a person about what songs they liked, it pretty much corresponded on the level of psychopathy that they had. So what's interesting about this is, if someone can tell that, sometimes you're better off not to let anyone know exactly the songs that you really like or don't like, because it could be profiling you on something that you might not want to be profiled on. Mastering engineer John Greenham has won 3 Grammys and has been nominated for 6 others. His client list includes work for Katy Perry, Mary J. Blige, Ice Cube, Jennifer Lopez, Sam Smith, and many more. We spoke at length about mastering via phone from his studio in the Los Angeles area. Can you give me some of your background, please? I mean, how did you get into the business?
Yeah, well, so I got into the business in San Francisco in sort of, let's see, at the late 80s is when I first started at Rocket Lab in San Francisco, which was actually the first CD mastering outfit in the Bay Area. So we had a Studio-Diaxis system. Do you remember those?
Yeah, I do. I've forgotten about it, actually.
So it used to take you'd have to sit there with the client for about sort of, if you had a 17-second fade, it would take about, I don't know how long, it seemed like a long time, maybe 30, 40 seconds to write the fade. So when you were writing the fades, you could be there for a while. It'd be several hours working on the fades. So, so that was, then we had a sonic system, Sonic Solutions, the early systems. That was a bit better, although pretty dense as well. I worked with Paul Stubblebine.
Oh, yeah.
There. He's kind of like, so Paul's like sort of, one of the biggest gearheads ever, basically. And he had after a while anyway, we got involved with Keith Johnson of Pacific Megasonics. And so we had those, the Model 1 and then the Model 2 and so forth, which were ludicrously expensive in those days. And so that's kind of how I got into it, through Paul, who Paul he always had the right gear. He's a bit of an audiophile, so he had like all the special MIT cables and the Tunde Parabicini, the EAR limiters and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Electronics.
Yeah. But previous to that, though, you're a musician, right?
Yeah. And, I played music in England for a while before I came over here. And then sort of, had children and sort of moved over to the other side of the glass because musician's lifestyle is not very appropriate when you're married and you have kids, really.
Yeah, got it. You moved to San Francisco first, right, from the UK? What brought you there?
Well, the weather mostly, I think. I think I came over for a vacation one winter, and then went back to England, and I never was able to forget, being there for Christmas, and the weather was beautiful, and then if you compare that to the way it is in England, you've got sort of 5 months of grey, rain and sleet and hail and stuff. So I'd say that was mainly to do with the weather.
Well, it was the same for me. I came from Pennsylvania, where we have harsh winters, and when I first came to California, there was 9 straight months of beautiful days, and I can remember going to the beach on Christmas, and it was 85 degrees, and thinking how wonderful it was.
I know. So, and actually the weather in San Francisco is not that great, really. So now that I've moved down here, I'm really spoiled.
Yeah, right.
So have you always been in LA since you came out here then?
Yes, I came out in the early 80s. I would never dream of going back or anywhere else for that matter.
No. I would have actually probably moved down here years ago. And my wife was from Southern California and she wasn't into it. But I remember I came down and actually I sort of interviewed with Bernie at his place, in the old place before he moved.
Yeah.
To where he is now, and kind of was set to go and, do, QC there or something like that. But unfortunately that never happened. So it's kind of a shame because the new place is really nice.
Yeah, it is, definitely. So when you came down here, you started work for Infrasonic, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And does that mean you were cutting a lot of vinyl?
No, actually, I was not involved in the vinyl part of it. They had, a couple of guys that worked there that just cut lacquers all day long. Although I have done that at one time or another, but it's the kind of thing that you kind of have to do that every day. I didn't get involved in that part of it, although that is a big part of their, what they do. But yeah, Infrasonic, I met, I became friends with Jeff by, I met him at ADS shows and stuff like that. So
yeah.
Those guys, they invited me to come down and work there. So yeah, I was there for, until 2 years ago, basically. And then since then I've been working at my house here in Los Angeles, which I basically did because I'm sort of I'm actually, I've been a Buddhist meditator for many years. So I finally decided that it's time that I get a place where I can work and do my meditation practice and not sort of, be able to do what I want. So that's basically the idea behind that.
Well, that's kind of interesting. Do you meditate that much that it gets in the way of a mastering project? Or do you do it at certain times of the day?
Yeah, no, I practice every day in the morning. And sometimes I'll do, 2 or 3 sessions a day. So I'll do my meditation and then I'll come down and look at some emails and figure out what I'm going to do and get stuff set up and maybe listen to a few things. And then I'll do another session and I'll come back and do some work and so forth like that. So my method of working is like that, actually. I tend to do short periods of time and then go away and think about it. I find it works better like that than just sitting for sort of 8 hours in a row trying to hash it out,
Well, that seems to be the way of the world now, the studio world, in that thanks to workstations, it's so much easier to do that. And before we were forced to working on a project until it was finished, and now you can work on it, put it away, come back again whenever. So I think that goes across the board anymore.
It actually is kind of, I feel like I'm working on it when I'm not working on it, if you know what I mean. I like that aspect of it. Like sometimes I'll be actually not working on it or listening to it, and I'll suddenly understand something about it.
Yeah.
And or come up with an idea of something that, I should try this or I should do that, So this is it.
I have to say that Buddhism seems to be the ideal philosophy for the music business. And I'm surprised that more people don't actually practice it, because considering the strife and everything involved in the business, it would just help everybody cool out, chill out so much more.
Yeah, no, that's right. Oh, well, I think, meditation, I always say meditation is one of the most popular things that no one really wants to do, because it's, that's sort of an English humor, by the way.
Yeah.
But because it's actually difficult to do, consistently. I mean, it took me many years to develop a daily practice. It's kind of like yoga or anything else for that matter. It's not. There are days when there are days when it's easy, and there are days when it's really quite difficult, even though you've been doing it for a long time. So it's not easy to do, but I think everyone recognizes that it would be a good idea,
Yeah.
to do it. I think everyone knows that. But yeah, it goes pretty well. I think the two things go pretty well together. I mean, I've been mastering for a long time, and so it's not something that I need to really think about a lot. You know, I don't necessarily have it, like I'm not thinking about it all the time. It's kind of, you know, so it doesn't sort of, it's not like, I imagine being a lawyer or something like that, where you'd have a lot of things to think about all the time. You know, your work would consume pretty much all of your time. I don't find that it's like that. So.
The thing about mastering too is you're working on one project and then it's gone, and
Yep.
it's for a relatively short period in time. Where if you're recording or producing or engineering an album, mixing an album, it's you have it for a longer period, and as a result, you're thinking about it more. But mastering it's kind of it's different because it's in and out, so to speak.
I totally agree. In fact, that's why I've done all the parts of making records in the past, and what I found, particularly with recording and producing, is that it just takes over your entire life. I mean, the time you're in the studio recording, you're usually, you're not able to even return phone calls or do anything. It's usually all-consuming. Or at least that was my experience of it.
Wow.
So mastering is actually good because you can have a life as well,
Well, I'm in the middle of a studio project right now that I'm producing, and I have to say it has consumed me, and today's a day off, but it's not really because I've been working anyway, and when I'm not working, I'm thinking about it. So, yes, it's, it's one of those things.
Yeah, it is. It is. So whereabouts do you work? Where's your place?
I'm in Burbank, California, although I don't have a studio that I can track in, so I go to other places to track, and I just mix where I'm at. Let's get a little geeky for a second. Do you have a philosophy about mastering, an approach that you use?
Yeah, I mean, I basically, I've got it down to a pretty simple collection of stuff these days. I just use, for the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I've been using digital audio Denmark converted, like an AX24, which is an 8-channel box. So I just go out of 1 and 2 back into 3 and 4, and then monitor through 5 and 6, and just loop back into the workstation through. I just use a couple pieces basically, which is a Elysia Alpha compressor and a Sontec EQ, and that's about it. And the combination of those things and the CubeTech plugins, which I use with Sequoia, on a Windows 7 rig, and that's about it. So it's pretty simple. There's only one. I used to have these things that, I used to use like a sonic system and a Pyramix system, and then you have to, different sample rate things going on, and you have different clocks. And
Yeah.
Now I just have one box, which is the master clock for the computer, and I find that everything is, it's kind of like using a console to make a record. Everything has this same kind of sound to it. So I think it sort of works. I mean, I've spent years geeking out over different clocks and clocking systems and stuff like that. But it's a digital audio Denmark box. It's pretty good. You basically so my sort of system is to hit the A to Ds on the way back in, and then it has a certain sound to it, which is a good sound, which usually, people obviously like, otherwise I wouldn't be in business. And it's kind of a warm sounding thing, and it gets a little crackly if you hit it too hard. So it's a question of just finding the right spot for whatever it is, and that's different for different kinds of music. But it's generally, I've never had much luck using limiters, really. They always end up doing stuff that I don't like.
Yeah.
And I recently actually was trying. Is this too much geekery? Or
No.
Is this okay?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, I was recently trying a what is that one called? It's I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, this limiter that I downloaded, and it's there's so many things going on when you use a limiter that I find it very difficult. In mastering, I find it really pays to have stuff that's tried and tested, that it's worked for you many times in the past, and not mess with it, because it takes, anyway, for me, it'll take me 2 or 3 months to really understand what something's doing. Oh yes, the Fab filter.
Oh yes.
Limiter. Yeah, and it's got a lot of this kind of like channel linking thing on it, and it's the kind of thing that you can really kind of go astray with it if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And you can think it sounds good, and then you listen to it out, which is why I generally these days I'll take like a couple or 2 or 3 days to work on them just to make sure I'm not, I haven't sort of fallen in love with something that isn't that great, so to speak. I've used the CubeTech plugins now for just for getting a little additional loudness if necessary. I've used those things for about 10 years now, and they never let you down. They're always, the loudness maximizer thing doesn't do too much, doesn't change things that much. It's kind of, anyway, I just kind of got a collection of stuff that works. And my experience is generally when I stray very far from that and start moving other things, that's when I get into trouble.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, are you asked to really smash things, make things really, as loud as possible?
Yeah, well, see, that's an interesting question, actually, because, the answer is yes for quite a few years. I mean, that is a requirement of the job. It has been for a long time. As a matter of fact, it really is always that way. I remember actually Bernie saying how, whatever the release format is, whatever it has been, when it was vinyl, there was always competition to see who could get the loudest record. People wanted their stuff to be louder. So it's like how much you can get onto the lacquer, and then CDs came on, and it wasn't any different. People want that. But the interesting thing that's happened recently, and I'm sure you know about this, of course, but it's the thing about these algorithms in Spotify and YouTube and so forth, leveling the sound.
Yes.
Which is a very interesting development. And actually, I first came across it about 2 years ago, and I remember I would, mention it to producers that I worked with, and they'd say, oh, that's interesting. Now can you make it really loud, but lo and behold, in the last sort of 3 or 4 months, actually, people have started talking about that. And actually, it's becoming a thing now. It's becoming a thing, which is really a nice development, actually, because, I mean, I suppose that if there's going to be any situation in which things are going to be compared digital file to digital file, people don't want their stuff to be that much quieter than anything else,
Yeah.
So there's still going to be that competition. But, I think it seems to me that you can there's maybe about a 2 or 3 dB range there where you can go below what would have been acceptable sort of even last year or the year before. And, it's that last sort of, it's always been my feeling about it is that last, 1 or 2 dB. It's always been a little bit too loud, and that's what we've all done. It's trying to get a pint into a half pint container.
Yeah.
It's always kind of felt like that to me. And I mean, we've got much better at it, but still, if you, it's like yeah, it's just a little too much. And now I'm finding that I actually don't have to do that, which is really nice. Actually, it's that's a really nice development. Based on the fact that really, I guess Spotify is pretty much, or streaming has emerged as the platform of choice for people to listen to music on. Really, so.
Are you asked to provide a dedicated master for streaming?
I not really, no. I mean, that hasn't come up. I mean, I have suggested that to people. I suppose if people had enough of a budget that you could do different masters for all the different. As a matter of fact, there are differences on the various platforms. I believe that YouTube is slightly different treatment than Spotify, for example. So yeah, ideally it would be really interesting to sort of geek out and find out what works best. I think, in fact, it's almost like the old days of radio. When you would, master something and then listen to it on the radio, and you would realize, oh yeah, it has too much low end.
Yeah.
You would kind of hear the compressors kind of pulling the whole thing down when the bass came in. And then you learned like how that works, So maybe it's kind of a similar thing to Spotify, although I'm sort of in the early stages of looking at that. And so far, I haven't really, honestly, it might be actually that what we're trying to do is get stuff louder than everybody else on Spotify by making it quieter, for example.
Oh, so there's more dynamic range.
Yes, there's more dynamic range, and maybe that makes it sound louder or something. I'm not sure. I'm, as I said, in the early stages of looking at that. But at any rate, it's nice to have a new development after years of kind of hammering on it stuff. I think.
Well, Glenn Meadows, right, from Nashville, mastering engineer.
I've heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he does a series of lectures. And one of the things that he demonstrates is by having more dynamic range, it actually sounds louder. And he'll play two tracks side by side, and he'll say, okay, which is the loudest one? And everyone in the audience will pick the one that has more dynamic range that's actually softer when it's all said and done, in terms of levels, meter levels anyway. It's the old thing of mixing with your eyes and forgetting to use your ears. And it's the same thing with master levels, where you begin to look at the meters and say, okay, wait, it's not loud enough, but yet it's plenty loud if you just listen.
Yes, I do know what you're saying. Yeah, I think, I think basically that, first of all, everything is different. Every song is different. Every type of everything's different. That's the reason why we're able to keep doing this for years and years and years, is that everything is different. You can't bring what worked on the last project is not necessarily going to work on this one, even if it's a similar kind of music,
Yeah.
So I think some things it's all about this kind of, game staging thing. And you sort of feel it to the point where and some things sound good if they're flattened out a bit, That's how they're meant to be. That's how they're meant to sound. Other things, not so much. What I've noticed over the years is, I mean, if you don't, from my days of working with Paul, who, we used to geek out and listen to the stuff in these giant audiophile systems that cost, $750,000, and stuff that's very dynamic and not at all compressed and recorded organically and very high quality stuff. It sounds really great on a system like that.
Yeah.
But if you play it on laptop speakers, it's just going to sound dull and uninteresting. It's just going to sound weak, actually. So there is, and this is the thing. I mean, you're mastering for it. Well, you're mastering for laptop speakers. A lot of people just listen on their laptops with no bass. And so forth, all the different things in the car, which is a bit mysterious. Car thing is terrifying.
Yeah, still.
Yeah, I've never been one of these people. Some people I know that work on something, I'm going to take my car and listen to it. And then I'll know exactly what's going on. That's never been me.
Yeah.
I've never been able to do that. I have no idea what's going on. I listen to it in the car and I hear, okay, well, there's a lot of bass. I don't know what else. Is there too much bass? I don't know. But some people have a very finely tuned idea of what's happening with their car stereo. I don't know how they do it, but
getting back to what you're talking about before, when you said playing back a large dynamic range and having them sound really good on big speakers, I've noticed that if you go to AES and you walk around and you go to all the speaker demos, they're always playing songs that have wide dynamic range. And everybody's always going, wow, that sounds great. Wow, that sounds great. And they never play anything that's current because it's so smashed and it doesn't sound nearly as good on those speakers. But you're right. In order to really make it work on smaller speakers that everybody's listening to, you almost have to go that way.
Yes, you do. Yeah. So it's that's kind of, well, it's definitely a consideration in mastering because, I suppose what happened for me is I had kids, and when they, I guess when they started listening to a lot of music, that was the sort of arrival of the MP3 and iTunes and all that. So I sort of saw that and I saw how they approached it. And, well, the first thing you notice about people that age, like young teen people who are, after all, the major consumers of music, really, is that they'll listen to it for about, it may have like sort of, I don't know, 2 or 3 seconds. If it's not particularly interesting, the arrow button gets pressed and you're on to the next thing. So it kind of has to come out of there's like, it kind of has to, say something right off the bat. And that's kind of a feature of, I think, the way that people listen to music nowadays. Although I guess the vinyl thing has kind of changed that a little bit.
And cassettes, too. Cassettes are making a comeback.
I know, I figure. Was it like 1.7 IPS, I think? 1.7 inches per second. I've always been amazed at how good they sound when you look at what's going on in there.
I used to teach a mastering class at a school down here, and this is again in the 80s. And I would take the class once a year down to a major duplicator just outside of Los Angeles. And this was when cassettes were really big. And they used to go and pick a random cassette off the line and go into the QC room that they had and play it back. And I was always amazed at how great it actually sounded. But then you realize that they're playing it back on super optimized gear, which no one else in the world will ever have. But it just goes to show you that it is possible for that format to actually sound good. It just, the playback systems that everybody's using never are optimized. So therein lies the problem.
Yeah. Well, the Nakamichi stuff is that they had those decks, that they had some of those things sounded really good.
Yeah, definitely.
I remember.
I noticed that, well, like most mastering engineers, you do a wide variety of music. I'm wondering if your approach is different depending on the style of music that you're mastering.
Well, I think that basically music, and this is something actually that it took me a long time before I actually realized this. I'm sort of ashamed to say, but it's really what it really is about. It's about the groove, because music is really about making people move. People want to dance to it and so forth like that. That's most of what it is. Get your head bobbing or something when you're listening to it on your headphones or whatever. So that's mostly what I pay attention to, honestly, because I became aware at a certain point that I think it was when I started working on a lot of rap music and the 808. That's the whole kind of rhythm section, really. That's the kind of pulse. And I started noticing that if you don't pay attention to that, in other words, if you're using some kind of compression or something and you're changing sort of, the attack and delay, or whatever that is, of the 808, then the whole thing doesn't work properly. And it's just easy to really screw that up in mastering, making stuff loud, compressing, never limiting it. And so I think that's, no matter what kind of music it is, that's when I have worked on something and then I am comparing it to the mix that they sent, the first thing I listen to is to see if the pulse is still there, or if I've kind of screwed it up somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hopefully what I've done is I've made it better, actually.
Yeah.
I've made it more exciting to listen to. I mean, that is possible. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. And then, but there are various things with different kinds. I personally find the most difficult music to work on is, stuff with like massive guitars and bass and drums and vocals. I mean, that's always, it's pretty challenging because the slightest thing that you do sort of drastically affects, especially when you get the guitars on, both sides and stuff. It's really hard to it gets away from you in a hurry.
Yeah, well, those mixes are very dense, so that's why.
Yeah. And then Latin music, for example, which I have done quite a lot of, that was an interesting learning process. And what I realized about that is that you have to be really careful. It seems really bright, but that's just because there's a lot of percussion instruments and stuff like that. And if you start adding high end to it, some little shaker thing that will suddenly pop out and change the groove. There's a whole sort of there's a whole ecosystem of percussion instruments working together. My friend Omar Sosa explained to me, he said, look, it's like a bunch of guys on the street corner talking to each other, that's really what it is. It's like they're saying stuff, this person's saying that. So it all kind of works together like a conversation. So that's an interesting, there are different things, different kinds of music that you definitely have to be aware of.
Okay.
Rap music, don't.
Is there a particular characteristic of the mixes that you get in that you wish would be better? Is there constantly mixes that you get in that you're thinking, I wish they wouldn't have done this? Or, is there one problem? I guess that's what I'm getting at. Is there one overall problem that you see on mixes that come into you if they have a problem? Well,
I feel like the main issue, especially these days, is the spaces that the things are recorded in. If they're actually, like drums, especially if people haven't recorded them in a studio or in a proper acoustic space,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a big factor. As far as mixing goes, I've done a fair amount of mixing, and I tend to be pretty non-judgmental about it because you don't know what the person's working with, but you can listen to it and you can say, why is that like that? But when you actually started looking at the mix, you might find out why it was like that.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't have much to work with or something, but so I generally just, I try to just do the best I can with what people send, and I don't. Sometimes I'll make suggestions and say, well, look, maybe. I mean, but it's usually pretty simple. Like the vocal isn't loud enough, but the vocal is kind of getting drowned out at this particular point or something. Usually like that. But generally, I don't know. Of course, there are a wide variety of people mix their own stuff these days, which I don't. It's not necessarily a great idea, but I would say though that overall, the thing that I learned many years ago, actually, when I was working on this record, that was this band that were quite successful. They were doing a lot of touring, and they wanted to redo their first album that they had made because it basically was horrible. I mean, it came out sounding really bad. The guy that was producing it got called away on some big project and left his intern in charge of it, and it sounded dreadful. So me and this producer friend of mine, he remixed it, I remastered it, and it sounded just totally different, it's so much better. And then I was looking at the band, and I was just looking around on the internet, and I came across this review of this horrible sounding record from NME in England. And it said, this is one of the best rock albums of the year. And I was completely thunderstruck. I was like, how? It really sounded horrible. And I'm not making that up. It was like, I'm not exaggerating. It sounded really bad. There was a number of things about it that were just awful. And then I was thinking about this, and I realized that actually, people respond to the song and the words to the song. That's mostly what they listen to.
Yeah.
We listen to all the product. We're very kind of critical about all that stuff. But honestly, so this is the thing, is that, a good song will overcome bad production and bad recording and all kinds of horrible stuff. Good production will not overcome a bad song, conversely. I mean, hopefully you have both.
Yeah.
Good song and good production, But if that's not the case, then the production is the one you can do without. So I think that's worth bearing in mind too,
Yeah, definitely. Okay, last question, John. So now that you've been in business for yourself for a little while, what is the best piece of business advice that maybe somebody imparted to you, or maybe you learned along the way?
Well, I think in this business, generally what I've found over the years is that you have to do it all the time, but every once in a while you have to go out and actually go to shows and go to things and see people. You don't necessarily get work out of it, but you have to see and be seen. And what I found is, because I have a tendency to not do that, because if I'm quite honest about it, I don't really like going to shows at all.
Yeah.
It's always too loud.
Yeah.
It's like you stand around and your back starts hurting after a couple of hours and it's like that. But I found that if I stop going out, about 2 or 3 months later, I'll stop working.
Oh.
That's basically what happens. I mean, for me anyway.
Yeah.
So it seems to be, there's some sort of mysterious law of the universe that is like, if people just sort of forget about you. And I suppose that's what Facebook in theory accomplishes, is that you can throw something up there every once in a while just to let people know you're still around. But basically, I think that's kind of my advice. And of course, LA is like built for that. That's what everyone does. That's the reason why everyone goes out.
Yeah, right. All
There's
right.
plenty of no one will criticize you for going out and handing out your business cards.
To find out more about John, go to johngreenham.com. That's John, JOHN, GREENHAM, all one word, johngreenham.com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. To listen to other episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to BobbyOwsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or go to BobbyOInnerCircle.com, or find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Mixcloud, and Google Play. At BobbyOwsinski.com and BobbyOInnerCircle.com, you'll also find a sign-up form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.